Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabaz Dan. As ever, I am the IT Geek. I am again joined by my good friend Dwayne. Hi Dwayne.
Hey Shabaz, how you doing today?
I am good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well.
So hopefully by now you've seen the introduction to mine and Dwayne's SC300 YouTube series that we're going to be doing. So you are fully aware of the breakdown. You know what to expect. So this is actually episode one within that. So we're going to be, as you saw, we're going to be talking about module one. So what I'll do is I'll quickly get started and let's go through to the slide deck. So again, as I explained, we are going to be doing some theory and a lab at the end of this. So I'll be covering the theory, and Dwayne's going to do the fun part, as it were. So just want to do for those who didn't watch that, I think just let's just do a quick re-intro. So yeah, my name is Shabaz Dar. I'm the IT geek, as I mentioned before. I've been working in the IT industry for about 15 plus years, 10 of those within cloud, and yeah, I'm Microsoft MVP in Enterprise Mobility. I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer, book author as well. I published a couple of books, one on SC400 and one on Azure Virtual Desktop. And as I mentioned, the SC300 topic is something me and Dwayne collaborated on with his book, but I will let him introduce himself and his accolades, including the book. Over to you, Dwayne.
Yeah. Dwayne Natwick, also known as Captain Hyperscaler. I've been in the IT industry 30 some odd years and in cloud technologies for probably going on 8 to 10. I am also a MVP as is Shabaz. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. Actually spent a couple years working for a learning partner and leading the training architect team there. I'm also a regional lead for the MCT program. My day job is a global principal cloud security technical lead for Atos, a global GSI. Just started that position this week, but prior I've been a portfolio manager and product manager for multiple years as well as a architect, pre-sales architect, and very multiple different hats within IT. So, and as Shabazz said, I did write for PACT the SC300 exam guidebook. I've also written the SC900 fundamentals book, and I'm working on the cybersecurity architect from Microsoft, the SC100 book right now. So done a lot of that, as well as my YouTube channel, my social media posts. Working on some user groups. Azure Back to Schools coming up in September.
Yes, indeed.
So try to stay active in the community with talks, as well as doing some things. Also working on launching a podcast here as well around cloud security. So yep, trying to keep myself busy. As Shabazz knows, there's never a dull moment once you become MVP. It seems like the artistry of saying no to when people want you to do stuff is probably the most difficult thing.
So, Dwayne, it sounds like you've got a load of time on your hands. You don't seem that busy, to be honest with you.
Exactly, yeah, just like this.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much, Dwayne. Yeah, I was technical reviewer on both of Dwayne's books. Obviously, I'll put the link in the description to the SC300 book. So, partnering with the person who literally wrote the book on the SC300, you can't ask for more than that, really. So let's jump right into what we are going on about here. So we are on module one to start with. That is me trying to be artistic. I think the cloud is just about in between my fingers, which is good.
Yeah, well done.
And we're going to be covering implementing an identity management solution in this first module. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to go through some of the theory around this, and then we're going to hand over to Dwayne to do the lab and the demo. So in this episode, we're going to be covering implementing initial configuration of Azure AD. So it's part one of this topic. So we're going to look at configuring and managing Azure AD directory roles, configuring and managing some custom roles, and then we're going to finish off the theory element anyway, talking about configuring and managing device registration options. and then I'll hand over to Dwayne to do a demo on configuring those Azure AD directory roles. So that should be really interesting. So let's talk about configuring and managing Azure directory roles. The first thing we really need to understand is who uses Azure AD. Okay, who are we talking about here? So we first have IT admins. Okay, so Azure AD facilitates controlling access to resources, essentially, such as applications. We're talking, that your organization might need. An example of this is using MFA, and we're going to talk about that topic in more detail. But using MFA to control access to certain resources. So IT admins are those like myself and Dwayne that can control that. Then I have app developers. So when we talk about app developers, these are people who access Azure AD. They utilize it to facilitate single sign-on, for example. This allows your app users to use existing credentials to have access to the application. So they could use, again, we're going to be talking about hybrid identity later on, but they'd be using on-premises identity to access cloud applications. App devs also have APIs available to them in Azure AD, and this allows them to create more customized experiences for its users. Final sort of person or entity that uses Azure AD are online subscribers. So, these are people like, your standard sort of users. So a user who subscribes to an M365 tenant or Dynamic CRM or even Azure. So each of these subscription services is classed as a tenant. So we have an M365 tenant, Azure tenant, Dynamic CRM tenant. And you can control the access that online subscribers have to different features and different apps. So now we understand who uses Azure AD. What are some of the different roles you can assign to these people? Okay, so there are different roles within Azure AD. There are a number of roles you can assign, and generally these all depend on your job or your role within the organization. So let's look at some of these different job roles and how they fit into Azure AD roles. So first, we have probably the best known Azure AD role. It's a role that you're assigned when you first create your tenant. It's a global admin role. So historically, in the early days of cloud, I'm sure you remember those, Dwayne, where when everybody used to have global admin.
Yeah. Yes.
The dark days, as I'm sure we probably call them.
Everybody needs admin access. Everybody needs to access everything.
Yes, exactly. So for those who are aware, global admin is, it has access to everything. You can access every aspect of Azure AD and your tenant and have full rights to it, okay? Since those early dark days, let's call them, more and more roles have been added and introduced. So organizations can influence something called least privilege access. Now, we will be touching on that again later on in the course, so we won't dive too much into that. The global admin has access to every resource, like I mentioned, both on Azure and 365 tenancy. Therefore, it should only really be given to a small number of people. And again, those people should be the people within your organization who have the expertise and the knowledge to not abuse that access. So it's a very, very important role and should really be given sparingly. Next, let's talk about user administrator. Okay, so this is a role that's suited, in my opinion anyway, I'd say more first and second line support people. What are your thoughts on that, Dwayne?
I mean, yeah, you got first and second line, plus you've got the people that need to add people to the Azure AD tenant as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that, yeah, exactly. The initial user setup as well as any issues that users have with access.
Yeah. So with the user administrator role, you can create users, you can manage them, and you can manage a majority of user accounts. The slight caveat, is that user administrator cannot manage certain properties. So for example, MFA, you don't have access to manage that with the user administrator role. A small bonus, however, is you can manage AD groups with a user administrator. So, that's a bit of an added bonus when you're using that role. The third role I want. So these aren't the just to cover. These aren't the only roles that we're talking about. I picked out a few at random just to go into more detail around. The third one is billing administrator. So this is quite an interesting one. So again, this is probably suited to somebody who is in charge of your billing to the cloud. Maybe, I don't know, someone in the finance team potentially. And this role allows them to manage a subscription, manage purchasing, and manage sort of support tickets if needed. But again, it's quite common what I've seen to give like your financial controller normal, isn't it, Dwayne, this sort of access?
Yeah, and the key point here is that it creates a separation of duties between the user administrator and the billing administrator when it comes to
Yeah.
licenses, so that the user administrator doesn't take advantage of that. They can assign licenses to users, but they have to be purchased by the billing administrator. So there's a separation of duties there, and the user administrator doesn't have then that financial role themselves. That is, like you said, left to somebody that's in finance, somebody that's in procurement, and then the user administrator needs to go through them. Key thing though, that both of those roles do have the capability, as Shabaz pointed out, to create support tickets within
Yeah.
Microsoft and manage
Correct.
those. So if the user administrators are, if it's a billing issue, the billing administrator can create that support ticket. If it's an access issue, the user administrator can handle that.
Exactly. So if we move on now, what I want to look at is Azure roles versus Azure AD roles. So, the AD in the middle there, so don't get those two confused. So what's the difference between these two? Let's do a quick comparison. So we've got Azure roles on the left and Azure AD on the right. So let's start with Azure roles. Manages access to Azure resources. So we're talking more the IaaS sort of compute, your virtual machines, storage, stuff like that. Probably more PaaS stuff as well. Whereas Azure AD manages access to Azure AD resources. So here we're talking, maybe enterprise applications and stuff like that. With both of them, you can create custom roles. So if one of the default roles, like the ones we just shown, if they're not applicable to you, you can actually create a custom role from scratch, which could be a combination of certain aspects from one role and certain aspects from a different role. So both of them support custom roles. There are slight differences in the scope. Okay, so when we're talking about scope, with Azure roles, it supports multiple levels. So all the way from your management groups down to your resource level. Whereas Azure AD roles is only at the tenant level only. So if you give someone an Azure AD role for user administrator, that's the entire tenant. Whereas with Azure roles, you can give someone access to a specific VM only to have administrative rights over that. So again, a lot more scope with the Azure roles. When we're talking about role information, what I mean by this is, the tools that you can use to manipulate the different roles. And again, slight differences in that with Azure roles, you can see there's Azure CLI, there's REST APIs, and also ARM templates. Whereas with Azure AD roles, it's the Azure Admin Portal, not the Azure Portal, Microsoft Graph, the 365 Admin Center as well. Both of them are manageable through PowerShell, but the difference is the module you use. So PowerShell as a tool you can use, but with Azure, you'd use the Azure module, and with Azure AD, there's a specific Azure AD module you would need to use. So just be careful with that.
Yeah, a key point around that. That's always a tough one to kind of a tough part of this to understand when you're talking about identity and access management, because you go into your Azure resources, you have that IAM piece in the portal, and they're both really role-based access control. But I think whenever the term RBAC is used, you start thinking about Azure roles rather than Azure AD roles. When we're thinking about Azure AD, we're thinking about that identity provider type of solution, just like you get with Facebook or LinkedIn, and that full SAML type of Azure AD, that identity provider piece. When like Shabazz said, Azure roles are specific to when you're working in the Azure environment.
Yeah, exactly. So just moving on, we finally there are multiple methods which you can use to assign these roles, and these are utilized depending on what best suits your organizational needs. So, sorry, examples of this are you can assign a role or user group, or switch that around. You can assign a user to a group, user or group to a role. You can also assign roles to broader scopes like resource groups or even a subscription. Another option, which is probably my favorite, is to use PIM, Privileged Identity Management. And again, this is another topic. I'm teasing you. We will be talking about it later on in one of the modules. So I won't go into too much detail right now. So let's move this discussion on now to another topic within this area, which is configuring and managing custom domains. So a few little facts around custom domains. As you can tell, a domain name is your identifier. So in my example, I have iamitgeek.com. That identifies me as the IT geek. Just like, if, again, the company I work for, it's Netcompany, their domain is netcompany.com. So that identifies them. Now you can have up to 900 managed domains, which is a hell of a lot. Personally, I've never seen that threshold met. Have you, Dwayne? I don't know in your history.
I can't imagine a company having that many registered domains.
Yeah, that'd be insane. And again, just to further cover that, from a federation perspective, you can actually have up to 450 domains. Again, never in my life have I seen anyone have 450 federated domains again. Dwayne?
No. I can't imagine that. I work for a company that has over 100,000 people. I can't think that they probably. I know we have a lot of domains. I can't imagine that we approach 900 or 450 federated domains.
I'd like to understand how they came up. There must be a reason they came up with that number. Like, okay, you know what? We had someone hit 400. Let's put it up to 450.
There's probably companies like General Motors and some of those Fortune 100 companies that might reach that and might get to that. Like I said, my company's done a lot of acquisitions, so maybe there's a lot of federated domains that we have, but when you think about the fact that a company of 100,000 people, that's quite a proportion. It's even still just like a 10% of them would be managed domains. It's like you could almost hand 100 people their own domain and let them run with it. But I don't see that happening.
So on the topic of subdomains, these are automatically verified as well. So you go through the rigmarole of adding a text record for your main domain and getting that verified. Any subdomains for that domain you create, they're automatically verified. So that's good from an administrative perspective.
And if you're not familiar with subdomains, those are, so you have captainhyperscaler.com, but then you might create a sales.captainhyperscaler.com that, adding that subdomain of sales. So if you create a departmental domain structure, you put that identifier that what's registered with the registrar is that captainhyperscaler.com, and the sales or development or finance identifier in front of that does not need to be re-verified, and that goes through automatically. Correct.
Good point. And just a quick point: if you do end up changing DNS registrars, which is quite common, you don't have to actually touch any of the Azure AD. You don't have to touch Azure AD. It all stays the same, because if you think about it, your domain's staying the same, your records are staying the same. All you're actually physically doing is moving those records to a different provider. So nothing changes on that side, which is quite good.
Yeah, I did that recently with my own Captain Hyperscaler, and did not have to do anything within my Azure AD.
Right. Very painless, which is good. If you do want to buy some for whatever reason, for example, you're moving 365 tenants, like I've done that plenty of times for clients. You have to remove all traces of the domain before deleting. So that's like any users, any groups, any applications, anything and everything that makes reference to that domain. You have to remove it. UPNs, email addresses, all that stuff, contacts, all need to go. There is a forced deletion option which you can use. And this is something I just wanted to quickly touch on. This is an option you can use if you're having difficulties removing a domain from your tenant. And you can run this from either the Azure AD admin center or also by utilizing I think it's Microsoft Graph API. So there are a few sort of scenarios you could really use this in. So you could, like I said, if you are wanting to just try and, if you're struggling to get rid of your domain, you can use this forced deletion. Again, to caveat that, there are a few scenarios in which you cannot use it. So that's, for example, if you've purchased a domain through the Microsoft 365 domain subscription service, or if you're a partner and you're trying to remove a domain on behalf of a client. So again, as consultants, we've all been in that situation where we have a partner, but we might be accessing their tenant through our own tenancy. If you're trying to do it for a client org of a partner, you can't use this option. So just a few little caveats there for you to note for the exam. So just want to move on to speaking about configuring and managing device registration options. BYOD is the pain for every administrator running. I don't care what you say. It's, people bring their own devices, different operating systems, different versions of the operating system, different applications. Can be a pain, right, Dwayne?
So should we start calling it BLOC instead of BYOD?
Yeah, exactly. Block, 100%.
Yeah, block instead of BYOD.
So
Yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of
yeah. Obviously, the flexibility that cloud brings a lot of challenges and headaches to the administrator side.
But to help manage that, what you can do from an Azure AD perspective is you can register the Azure AD devices. So what I want to do now is there's a couple of different options we have when we're configuring and managing devices within Azure AD. So I want to touch on all those. Let's start with Azure AD registered devices. So when we're talking about the definition of an Azure AD registered device, it's a device that's registered to Azure without the need for any corporate account to sign into the device. So you sign in with your own personal account. It could be a Microsoft account, it could be a local account, but it's your personal account that you use to sign in. Let's talk about the sort of audience. It's users who want to take advantage of BYOD. They don't want a corporate device. They could be a contractor, for example, and they have their own device. They have multiple contracts. So if you use that to BYOD, bring their own device, and be like a guest in people's tenancies. How about device ownership? Where does that lie? The end user or corporate organization, depending on what agreement you have as that person is using BYOD, depending on what agreement you have with the organization whose tenant you are kind of using. Okay, so with an Azure AD registered device, it's end user or it can be the corporate organization. From a supported OS perspective, Windows 10, 11, iOS, Android, and macOS all support Azure AD registered devices. So if you have an Apple Mac, or you have an iPad or an iPhone, those can all be Azure AD registered devices. Same with Android and obviously Windows 10 and 11. So what about sign-in options? So as I mentioned, you can have local credentials, you can have a password, Windows Hello, or biometric. So that's face recognition or your finger. Now let's talk about device management quickly. So MDM, for example, Intune. So you can manage personal devices, BYOD devices, Azure AD registered devices, different name for it, I suppose. Manage all that through Intune or MDM, a type of MDM platform. Just a few key capabilities before we move on for Azure AD registered devices. Single sign-on to the cloud resources, and it's controlled by conditional access. Okay, so again, with it being an Azure AD registered device, it falls under that conditional access area, and those sort of policies can be used to essentially control access, what BYOD devices can and cannot access. So I just want a quick little diagram to show what an Azure AD registered device would look like. You've got your Windows 10 BYOD laptop, you've got your mobile device, and they're simply just registered with Azure AD. Okay, so there's no other sort of identity provider in place. It's your own personal device. Talks directly to Azure AD as a registered device. Okay. Next, I want to move on to Azure AD join devices. Okay, so let's go through the similar what we just went through there, but this time with Azure AD joined. So what's the definition? Only joined to Azure AD and it requires a corporate account. So whereas with a registered device, you could use a personal account, has to be a corporate account. So example for Netcompany, shabaz.dar@netcompany.com. Okay. Let's talk about the audience quickly. Supports both hybrid and cloud-only deployments. Okay, so we will be talking about hybrid shortly later on in this module. So, device ownership. Always a corporate organization. Because you're using a corporate account, you as the person, me as the individual, Dwayne as the individual, we don't have any ownership over that. That's owned by the tenant corporate tenant organization. What are the supported operating systems? Again, same as with Azure AD registered, we had Windows 10, we had Windows 11, but also Windows 10 Home is not supported. So that's one thing to know because it's a Home edition. That version is not supported. From a device management perspective, again, the same as registered devices, some sort of MDM. Intune would be the prime example, or endpoint manager, whichever way you want to call it. Again, just some key capabilities before we move on. Single sign-on is supported for both on-premises and cloud resources. And this is where that hybrid device model is going to come in. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything. We are going to talk about it. Again, it's controlled by conditional access. You can also use self-service password reset, and also Windows Hello pin reset as well. Again, these are sort of topics we are going to talk about later on in this series. Again, just a quick little diagram to just explain how this would look. So again, we've got Azure AD in the center. Slightly different, we have on-premises Active Directory on the right-hand side, but then we have the corporate Windows 10 laptop, for example. And you have that connectivity between on-premises AD and Azure AD, and that allows that hybrid element. But then you also have the Windows 10 laptop, which talks actually directly to Azure AD, so it doesn't talk to on-premises AD. So even though we've got the hybrid identity, we don't have the hybrid device. Okay, so that's one difference to note there. You have to use your Azure AD credentials, although it is the same technically as your Active Directory ones. So next, I want to touch on, speaking of hybrid device join devices, let's discuss hybrid join. So from a definition perspective, it's an on-premises AD joined and Azure AD joined device. So it needs to be joined to both the cloud and your on-premises environment to be classed as a hybrid device, okay? From an audience perspective, hybrid environments with existing on-premises AD. So again, it can't be just fully cloud. You have to have some sort of connectivity, as in an Azure AD sync, for example, with an on-premises AD. From a device ownership perspective, fully corporate. There's no, again, it's similar to Azure AD joined, fully corporate organization owned devices. We're talking supported operating system. Bit more broader this time. So you've got Windows 7, 8.1, 10, 11, but also Server 2008 and R2 for any sort of, if you have, say, an RDS environment, an RDS farm on premises that you want to use with Azure App Proxy or something like that for that hybrid element. And also, 12, R2, 2016 and 2019 as well. All the server OS is supported.
And hopefully you're getting those 2008s out of your environment.
Yes.
and the Windows 7 and 8.1.
Although they are supported, please don't. We're talking about device signing. Again, we have passwords or Windows Hello for Business, and we are going to be talking about Windows Hello for Business later on in this module. So keep an eye out for that. Device management perspective, a few more options with this. You have group policy, GPO, config manager, or co-management as they call it, with endpoint manager. So that's what used to be known as SCCM. So SCCM and endpoint manager connected to do co-management. Okay, group policy obviously being on premises, endpoint manager having the Intune aspect of it as well. So let's finish off with some key capabilities of hybrid joined devices. Single sign-on for both on-premises and cloud resources, controlled by conditional access, self-service password reset, and Windows Hello. Again, topics that we'll be touching on later on in this module. Quick little diagram. So again, similar to what we saw with the Azure AD joined devices, however, we have that arrow in the middle, so your corporate device is actually joined to both Azure AD and on-premises AD, okay? So before we move on to the fun part, handing over to Dwayne for the demo, quickly want just to touch on and discuss device writeback. So this is a feature you get for Azure AD Connect, which is something Dwayne's going to show us later on in this module. I'm going to do a demo of that. But device writeback essentially allows you to synchronize devices from on-premises to cloud and cloud back to on-premises. Okay, so that's quite an important feature. Certain licensing requirements with that. But again, I don't want to give too much away, so we will be going into more detail around that. But for now, it is demo time, finally. The people are bored of my voice now, Dwayne. They want to hear you.
All right.
So I will I'll hand over to you, if that's all right.
Turn over my screen. We are in the portal, the Azure portal. You can do a good amount if you're more familiar, more comfortable with the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You can get to Azure Active Directory from there as well. So I'm more comfortable with the Azure portal. They look identical once you get into them. It's just for me, I just usually start with portal.azure.com. Something real quick too to point out, being that this is the first module, if you go to GitHub or go to your favorite search engine and do SC300 GitHub, you will find the Microsoft Learning labs for the course that you can go in and actually go through step by step. Within here, there is labs for every module to kind of follow along and do it yourself if you want to do. Definitely recommend it as you prepare for the exam to really get hands on.
Great point. I'll put the link in the description as well for that. By the way,
we'll put the link in for everybody to easily access. These have just been refreshed as well for the newest domains. So, we're going to focus on Azure Active Directory. So here is Azure Active Directory, and if we look here, when we get into Azure Active Directory, we get our overview of our environment. Something to point out, this demo is mainly about roles, but when we think about our domains and the domain names that Shabaz was mentioning, when we create our account, we put what we want our tenant to be named, and we are given this .onmicrosoft.com account when we create our account within the within Azure Active Directory, and this stays with us as long as we have our tenant. It is we don't make any changes to it. We don't edit it, and it allows us access to our account. Gives us some preliminary access to for our administrators before we start to register any custom domains. So keep that in mind. You do get this, and it is a registered domain within Microsoft, and everybody that uses Azure Active Directory has a .onmicrosoft.com domain, and then their tenant is the subdomain for that. So let's go back now to our Azure AD, and let's talk about roles. So I'm going to scroll back up. Rather than going right into my users, you can go into your users and define roles. I don't want to do that because I have some personal and other people's names in there that I didn't want to expose to everybody. So I've got my members in here of some of my administrators. if I go in and select one of these administrators, I'll select my main account here, and you can go in and see here the assigned roles of this user. I will talk about privileged identity management in another module. I do have PIM enabled, so you can see eligible assignments and active assignments. If you're not using PIM, these little headers aren't going to be there. Everything's going to be active. This is my global administrator. I also have this user set up as a compliance administrator. If I wanted to add an assignment, though, I can select then add assignments, and then I can select roles from all of these roles within here. And again, these are the Azure AD roles, not the Azure roles. If I go to roles and administrators here, you can see that I don't have any other administrative roles. Let me go back to my members here and go into Azure role assignments. So here I can actually select Azure role assignments for this user as well and assign them an owner within the IAM of Azure. I'm going to go back here into roles here within my main Azure Active Directory. And here we can see all the roles that are available. I think there's probably a couple hundred roles in here. Maybe not that much, but these are all the pre-assigned and built-in roles. You can also, if you have a premium level subscription, create custom roles as well. If you want to have a user that if you go into one of these roles, so let me just go to billing administrator as one of the ones that we discussed, and you go into the description of the role, you can see what the permissions are and what they can do in terms of reading and writing. If you just want administrators that or somebody that can't do all the tasks and you need to adjust a little bit for your environment, you can create a custom role. Probably 90% or so of what you need to do within the environment you could probably do with a built-in role or a couple of built-in roles that you assign to people. It gives you a great start because these built-in roles are there. They are very descriptive in terms of what they are. You can set them up appropriately for your environment. We'll get more into all of this when we talk about privileged identity management. But then very easily, pick a role and then you can assign the users or assign the groups that you want to put into those roles by just selecting the account and then choosing the administrator that you want to use for that account. So, those are kind of the main things around roles and assigning roles within Azure Active Directory. Very similar if I go back and just pick, say, virtual machines and choose a virtual machine here. What you're going to see in here is the access control IAM for our virtual machine, and these are our Azure roles. And you can see, again, a list of built-in roles, but they're a little bit different in the naming convention. We have our owner, contributor, reader. You don't need to worry a whole lot about that for this particular exam, but just understand the differences that Shabaz had mentioned. And this is specific to Azure resources, or really actually particular to this particular virtual machine. We can get very granular and just say, okay, this person is going to be owner of this virtual machine. I can scale it up within here, within this virtual machine, and go to my resource group, and I can do the same thing here. And you can see you can build kind of a hierarchical relationship in the Azure roles within here, whereas Shabaz stated in the lecture, with our Azure AD roles, this is tenant-wide. We're assigning specific roles, and that's within the Azure. It could be within the Azure environment if we're using Azure AD as our verified credentials and our our authentication and access to our Azure resources. We can use that as well as Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, Power Platform, Power BI, all those cloud capabilities, and then also federated access to other applications and resources as well.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Dwayne. That was a great demo, and I hope you guys got something from that. So that brings us to the end to this first episode. So again, we've covered a lot. Obviously, a decent amount of theory and a good lab there. So what have we covered today? We've covered an initial sort of kind of high level around Azure AD, the different roles, different types of users that are going to be using it, and also different type of device registration options. So excellent information there. And this is all obviously part of the Microsoft Learn as well. So thank you very much, Dwayne, for your time. Thank you for being my partner in this. And,
of course. Yeah. Hopefully everybody from this video gets a really strong foundation and understanding around Azure AD and how Azure AD and Active Directory kind of work together, at a foundational level, because we're going to really start building up from there, and really the fun stuff of how we start to configure that, and how we start to delegate those accesses and tie everything together in our environments.
Exactly. So this was only part one of implementing initial configuration of Azure AD. The next episode is going to be part two, and we're going to be talking about configuring delegation of administrative units and also looking at tenant-wide settings. And then we've got a couple of labs, a bit more lab heavy in the next episode. So thank you for joining us. Please do subscribe to both mine and Dwayne's channels. Please do like and comment on this video. Hit us up on our socials if you've got any questions. But thank you very much, and up until next time, thanks and goodbye.